hopefully, knock on wood, SU fans won't have to deal with that as we bring on David Shumate. David, thanks so much for joining us. The home games for Syracuse were kind of an afterthought when the schedule came out. We looked at everybody they had to play on the road. This is a pretty big game inside the Dome tomorrow between a couple of teams 1-0 in conference play.
Yeah, no question. Thanks for having me on. And obviously, I think it has more juice after what happened last week. Certainly with what Syracuse did down at Clemson, just dominating in Death Valley, and with Duke getting a win to start conference play over NC State, you start to think about the possibilities, I'm sure, on both sides of this, with both teams 1-0 in ACC play. It's one of the bigger games in the league, I think, this weekend, and two teams that feel like they have a real shot, to get to Charlotte, albeit each with some bumps in non-conference play. But I think they both feel really good about where they're at. We
had Wes Durham on our show a couple days ago, and he brought up the stat that we've brought up a few times since then, and that is Duke is averaging better than 7 yards per play. We know they've got a really dynamic quarterback in Darian Mensah. What else has stood out to you on that side of the ball that has allowed Duke to score all these points and rack up all these yards?
Yeah, to put a stat to what you're talking about, the explosiveness has been there, and kind of last year, a lot of people thought about Duke's offense was kind of home run or nothing, right? The long ball and stuff like that. But this offense is actually more explosive. They got something like 26 plays of 20 or more yards so far after having 56 all of last year. So you can do the math. They're on a much better trajectory in that respect. And I think it goes to just all the different weapons you have to contend with when you're going up against this offense. Cooper Barcade is the leading receiver transfer that comes in from Harvard. They've got a speed guy and Andrell Anthony. They got a really good slot guy. And Quayshawn Brown, Samir Higgins provide some experience. And that's just the receiving room. Jeremiah Hazley's back healthy at tight end. Landon King, a transfer, comes in. He's given some depth to that room as well. And the running back room has been really interesting to watch. They started the year really with four backs and a rotation, and Jacquez Moore has been the lead back. He's gotten the start, but it's really been the emergence of a freshman and Nate Shepard, who's looked really good, and a transfer from Appalachian State, and Anderson Castle, who was the ACC running back of the week a year ago. So it just presents so many problems. There's so much you have to defend with this offense that it creates so many openings, because it's not like there's a single guy or two to take away. There's just so many different ways that they can hurt you.
You look at their schedule, David, and, Elon beat them easily. Illinois is a really tough team. They lost that one. We talked about last week how, Duke was able to rally and beat NC State. The one outlier seems to be that Tulane game. And I know that, Tulane must have been playing inspired football, given the fact that the ties between the two programs and losing their quarterback and so on and so forth. What happened, though, in that Tulane game that Duke kind of stubbed its toe in week 3?
They got behind. 24-3 was the score at one point, battled back to get it within a touchdown game. And I think on one hand, you have to give some credit to Tulane that they threw out some stuff that they hadn't shown on tape through the first 2 weeks of the season. You mentioned the importance of that game to them. And also you have to tip your cap to Jake Retzloff, their quarterback, the transfer that came in from BYU, hadn't been there very long. In his first couple of games, the accuracy hadn't been great, but he was lights out that night and really hurt Duke on the ground with his legs in many different facets in the quarterback run game. And to me, that's going to be one of the fascinating things to see tomorrow. You hear about Ricky Collins and the mobility he brings to the position. How much is that going to be used? Because Tulane certainly had success in that realm against the Blue Devils in that game. And some of it was, like I said, got behind early, battled back, but the hole was just too deep that they had dug. And you mentioned that the Illinois game, and look, some of this is really obvious. Duke turned it over 5 times in that game against Illinois, had an early turn that game against Tulane, and a week ago against NC State, they had no turnovers and forced 4 of them. So, in some respects, you can draw a pretty straight line to how cleanly Duke has played to whether or not they've won or lost, and that's obviously going to be really important tomorrow, too.
What do you make of this defense? We've had a few people on this week, and they point to both teams should be able to move the ball tomorrow. Both teams should be able to score points. It may come down to, which defense comes up with a big stop in the fourth quarter. How would you assess the Duke defense and how it's performed to this point?
Yeah, statistically, it's not where they want it to be, right, from a points given up standpoint. And third down and long has been something they've been working on for most of the year, and at times has been a problem. But if you look at the pieces and if you look at some of the individual plays, you see flashes of what this defense was a year ago, what a Manny Diaz and Jonathan Packey, who's the coordinator on the defensive side, what their defenses typically look like. Duke is still right there statistically in terms of TFLs per game, top 10 in the country, and sacks are right there as well. It's a defense that wants to play aggressive and be disruptive. They have given up some big plays, and that's certainly something they want to clean up. But if you look at the front four, I'd put it up against any team in the ACC with the guys that come off the edge, was Wesley Williams and B.J. Anthony, who leads the ACC in sacks, and they're stout on the interior with Aaron Hall and Josiah Green, the transfer that comes in as well. Dealing with some injuries at the linebacker position. You guys have probably already covered it. Nick Morris is out for the year. They're starting middle linebacker. He went down in the game against NC State. They're also going to be without Kendall Johnson, so likely to see some younger guys rotate in there. Luke Mergott is likely going to start as the middle linebacker, but they've got some young guys, highly touted recruit. Bradley Gompers would likely get some run. Elliot Shopper as well, so that'll be interesting to see. And on the back end, their best player is Chandler Rivers. He's an All-American caliber corner, so they need him to have a big impact tomorrow as well. So it'll be interesting to see, because you see pieces of this being a really good defense, but at times this year they have had their challenges. You
mentioned the stats maybe not where they want them defensively. Another area that maybe the stats aren't where they want them is the red zone offense. 16 trips to the red zone, 12 scores to show for it. They're ranked 106th nationally in red zone offense. Is there anything that you're seeing once they get inside the 20 that is prohibiting them from cashing in as much as they would like to and cashing in with touchdowns as much as they would like to?
I think in the first handful of games, this is something Manny Diaz talked about. It's not me. Is they wanted their run game to be a little more efficient when they got in the red zone, and that was markedly improved in the game against NC State, where they were much better in the red zone. But there hasn't been like an individual thing you can point to, because against Illinois, they had some opportunities go away from them, including the game against Elon because of turnovers. And then down at Tulane, it was some issues in the kicking game and special teams that bit them in the red zone. So there's been some things they have to clean up, and they seem to have found that in the game against NC State, which was by far their cleanest game of the season. And you saw with the 45 points in the red zone execution where it wanted to be. And that's been kind of Manny Diaz's mantra with this team so far this year is, look, it's not the start they wanted, 2-2. There are lofty expectations inside that building going into the year, but they felt like everything that was going wrong was within their control, which was encouraging at the same time despite the record, and they kind of showed that against NC State when they cleaned things up. They were kind of doing what they wanted to against the Wolfpack.
Curious to get your take and your thoughts on this Syracuse team. We watch every second of every game, and we're obviously hyper focused on this team. As you kind of take a step back and look at Syracuse from the outside looking in, what stands out to you about this team?
The receivers are lights out. I mean, it's incredible to watch some of the catches they make, the separations they get, and take your pick, right, whether it be the tight end or the top three wideouts. Considering everything that Syracuse had to replace from a year ago, it's incredibly impressive. And Jelly is awfully good. I don't want to take anything away from him. So I do think that receiving core is something the Blue Devils are going to really have to contend with tomorrow, because it is special in this passing attack that, last year led the country. You bring in a new quarterback over from Notre Dame, people are expecting a step back, and it's like 1-4, right, nationally. Yeah. So Collins is obviously really good. So the passing attack, to me at least, is really what jumps off, and then you don't often see a 17-year-old playing corner. So that, to me, also is very impressive what Samuel's done earlier in the year.
Yeah, and he is really, really good. I think we were all kind of skeptical, too. Like, really, this kid should be in high school? And he's lived up to the hype. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be a sold-out crowd tomorrow. I'm sure you know that. It's Parents' Weekend, Family Weekend here at Syracuse, and the place is going to be full. It gets loud, as you know, in the dome and the way that the sound reverberates off the roof and so on and so forth. Are you aware of anything different that Manny Diaz maybe has done this week in terms, to get the guys ready for what the environment may look like and sound like, I guess, more importantly, come tomorrow?
Well, I'm looking forward to it, because the last time I was there, the last time actually the Blue Devils played in a dome was in 2020. It was not loud. There was nobody there. It was a very surreal experience when Duke went up there during the COVID season. So it'll be nice to have a full crowd in there. But to get back to what you're talking about, they have been having the offense work in the indoor facility. Most of the week, Manny Diaz has talked about this and pumping as much noise as they can in there to get a feel for what it's like, to do the nonverbal communication, but also, the coach comm communication to the quarterback and everything that goes on with and his helmet. So they've been doing a lot of that to work on the execution, expecting it to be loud. And as you said, the way the noise reverberates in that building, also worth noting that is the last time the Blue Devils played in a dome was in 2020. But as you guys know, there were no fans in the building.
You brought up that you guys struggled against Tulane because they hit you with things that they didn't put on tape. this week you're going against a team with a starting quarterback that even Syracuse hasn't seen on tape. How are they preparing for Ricky with Angeli out?
No, I mean, I think it's you kind of got to be ready for the unexpected, right? And I think both teams have to deal with that in certain respects when those two are matching up, because I mentioned with some of the new pieces at linebacker that the Blue Devils are going to be rolling with that Syracuse hasn't technically seen. So there's definitely going to be a chess match in the game with the two coordinators offensively for Syracuse and defensively for the Blue Devils. And to me, that is going to be interesting, particularly early in the game, if Syracuse comes out swinging or if there's a feeling out process, because one thing that the stats don't really tell you, and Yasin Willis is really, really good, and I thought he set the tone in the game down at Clemson, but through the first 4 games, the Blue Devils have been really good against first and second down runs, and I think that'll be interesting to see early on how things set up, and then if you get into a third and long situation, how the Blue Devils execute in that respect, because they've given some of those up, and obviously Syracuse has been pretty good at converting third down. So to me, that chess match is going to be interesting because, as you mentioned, the unknowns and how you prepare for that and how you kind of have to work on your base stuff just to make sure you're playing sound because you don't know what's coming.
All right, David, with all that being said, you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but I guess finish this sentence. Duke wins tomorrow if blank.
If they play clean. I think that's a boring way to put it, not the most exciting thing, but I think that's the case for both of these teams, right? I mean, way under the hood, and that win for Syracuse at Clemson, forced 2 turnovers, didn't turn it over. I mean, that is how you went on the road, and I think the Blue Devils know that you got to go, not have penalties and not turn the football over. You don't want your defense having to defend a short field all day, and evidenced by, look, in Duke's 2 losses, they outgained Illinois and Tulane, but a lot of that's because you're coming from behind, you're throwing a lot long fields, and last week, if you look at the total yardage, you could say, NC State outgained Duke, but a lot of that was because NC State was having to do long fields and also having to throw it a bunch to try to get back into the football game. So you don't want to be in that position of having to throw it 50, 60 times because you're trying to play catch-up. So to me, playing clean is of the utmost importance tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned Syracuse, and you're spot on. Syracuse played a clean game against Clemson. The other thing I would add to that from an SU perspective, and something for you to keep your eye on tomorrow, Syracuse tackled well against Clemson. They did not tackle well against Tennessee, and that the game kind of got away from them a little bit because they missed some tackles, couldn't get off the field, and Tennessee took advantage. They definitely reversed that against Clemson, so that'll be interesting to see tomorrow. Something we're going to keep our eye on is how well Syracuse tackles against this Duke offense. David, thanks so much for the time. We do appreciate it.
Appreciate it, fellas. Thanks for having me on.
All right, David Shumate, voice of Duke.